Diver Anon again. Back with some more stories from my colleagues and friends around the world. Please sit around the campfire and enjoy a good old-fashioned thread. They don't make them like they used to. I post these threads regularly every Friday night, so be sure to check in for new stories every week. Have you heard of the raptures of the deep? Few people have. 30 meters below the surface, water pressure alters the properties of gases within the human body. What was once harmless or vital begins to poison your mind. The deeper the depth, the deadlier the poison becomes. Symptoms include impairment, euphoria, laughter, anxiety, hallucinations, hysteria, terror, and death. And yet, we still venture into these depths, risking our lives and minds. Delving into a place where the barrier between the mind and reality becomes thin. Those of us who return can bring with us only memories of that alien world beneath the waves. These are some of those memories. Tales from beyond the depths of madness. Tonight, I'm going to be shining a spotlight on an aspect of the ocean that usually flies under the radar. Something far deadlier than all the sharks, squids, and various denizens of the deep that somehow isn't nearly as widely known or feared. I am of course, talking about the currents of the ocean. If you've ever been surfing or spent any amount of time in the ocean, you will be able to appreciate what I'm talking about. Current is power in its most raw form. Inescapable, absolute. Once a current has grabbed you, there is no escape. Fighting will just exhaust your energy reserves and kill you quicker. There are many currents that are known, dangerous killers. What people never talk about are the phantom currents. Like rogue waves, these streams of water seemingly appear and vanish at will within the ocean, sucking divers and swimmers to their death without warning. Superstitious divers will often tell you, the sea isn't awake. She's asleep, dreaming. And she takes as much as she gives. I've had plenty of close calls and experiences with currents, some more harmless than others. The one I remember most clearly, oddly enough though, is the one where I was in the least danger. It was a normal night dive, as normal as dives at night can be. Anyone who has ever been on a night diver knows what I'm talking about. The darkness is so black, so complete that it consumes you. The way down is nothing but black abyss in every direction. It takes a lot of getting used to. It still freaks me out, even after I've done it over 100 times. Like most of my non-professional dives, this one was purely an exploratory one. The ocean and everything in it have always held a fascination for me. All sorts of stuff tends to accumulate at the bottom of the ocean, and I'm always trying to find it. My one rule is to look, but never take. The sea takes and gives in equal measure. If you take from her, she'll take from you. That might seem like a bunch of old sailor bullshit, but it has more truth to it than you might imagine. My discovery on that night came near the end of the dive, right before I was about to head back. Just as I'd made my mind up to return to the boat, I spotted something jutting out of the sea floor. It was a raft of sorts, improvised and constructed out of decrepit wooden boards and logs. A few objects lay nearby. An old disposable plastic water bottle. A plastic flip phone. 2 old flip-flops. A metal cooking pot. Some cloth sacks. A tiny bottle so overgrown with algae that the rubber nipple looked like a plant sprout. After investigating further, I found another raft. Then another. And another. Hundreds of rafts of various construction type, quality and decay. Many of them must have been hundreds of years old, if not older. One of the rafts had an old flintlock pistol set beside it, albeit rusted to such a degree it was nearly unrecognizable. The entire area was a massive underwater grave. That's the only way I can describe it. Just looking at it gave me chills. Not from danger, but from the profound nature of what I was witnessing. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of years of desperate, failed voyages on improvised craft collected in one area by an undersea current. I never found a single bone or body, just the remains of the craft that had sunk beneath them. This story is very personal to me because discoveries like this are the very essence of why I take the risks of diving alone at night. Unknown, forgotten and unseen stories, lying silent at the bottom of the sea. Remnants of a life long since dead and gone, all hopes, dreams and experiences gone with it. I wish more than anything I could have spent longer down there poring over every raft, every item. But my oxygen was running out. And when I returned the next day to the exact same spot, I found nothing but sediment and bare seabed. The hole. This story comes from the father-in-law of a young diver that Frank trained. We'll call him Ibrahim. The area of the world Ibrahim is from has a long cultural history of diving, long preceding modern scuba gear. An entire culture developed over the ages of the songs and stories of the pearl divers, venturing into the depths in hope of finding hidden treasures. And like with all things, the sea gives and takes in equal measure. For every beautiful, luminous gem of the deep taken from her, The sea will take something in return. Sometimes a ring, an heirloom, a jeweled diving knife. Sometimes much more. There's one legend among these pearl divers that has apparently existed in one form or another since antiquity. The name is in their native language, but it roughly translates to the chasm or the hole. It's common to hear it referred to amongst pearl divers talking about a lost friend or comrade. The hole got him. So, what is the hole? It's not a place, apparently, so much as it is a thing. It supposedly appears without warning, silently sucks a victim into its gaping maw and vanishes without warning. The divers don't describe it as a creature, though they do speak as if it is a living thing. Descriptions of supposed survivors speak of a giant circular chasm opening beneath them in the sea floor, with a strong current sucking unfortunate divers down into its abyssal blue depths, never to be seen again. Toprigged Trawler. This story comes from a former deckhand on a deep-sea trawler that did fishing off the coast of Australia. I get a lot of stories from that part of the world. Weird shit happens down under, it seems. We'll call our young intrepid deckhand Paul. He was trying to earn some quick money working on a fishing vessel, though his career was doomed to be short-lived. There's a couple details he described that are important to the story. This happened a while back, when Australian fishing was a booming business. Big money was being made, and lots of people wanted it. So it wasn't uncommon to see boats of various being converted into fishing trawlers. The problem with this, of course, being that the boats aren't designed to mount the heavy nets and fishing machinery used by a trawler. Paul never learned about this until after his ill-fated first voyage, otherwise he claims that no amount of money would have lured him on board. As he described it, the disaster struck on their very first haul. The official story is that their net hit a snag. It was Paul's first time, so it's hard to say whether or not his opinion has much merit. But in his opinion, something had grabbed the net and was pulling them down. And because the trawler was top-rigged as he described, the entire boat lurched over with the net and capsized in just a few moments. However, it wasn't the ship capsizing and sinking without warning that stuck with Paul the most. It was what happened after. He dove and swam for safety just in time to avoid being pulled down with ship. After taking a breath, he dove back down to see if there was anyone he could help. Most of the crew had surfaced already or were swimming up, but one man was swimming down, after the ship. He managed to grab the end of a trailing rope and began to pull himself down towards the ship as it rapidly sunk into the gloomy depths. He turned back to look at the surface before sinking out of sight for good. The man's face was etched with the most indescribable agony possible. Just by looking at his face, into those eyes, Paul said that he could feel that man's pain. The expression still haunts him to this day. The hopeless eyes, the agonized expression, hair swirling around as he sank further and further beyond the surface's light. Thanks to another nearby boat, almost all of the crew survived. There were only 2 fatalities. The captain, and his son. This next story is a pretty short one. Last one for the night, but I have a big juicy one that I'll be posting sometime tomorrow. Not sure when. I'm going fishing with a bunch of buddies. I'll try to write it up between bites. This is a story I've heard through the grapevine in various forms a bunch of times. I suspect it's a single story going through the telephone game over and over again, but it might have been several different stories with similar shared elements. The element that ties all of the stories is the one I started this thread out with. The divers are swimming somewhere out in the ocean, far from land. A current appears out of nowhere, sucking one of the divers downwards. It is so strong that the diver is pulled down out of sight within the space of less than 30 seconds, almost before the other divers can react. Some stories have divers vanishing from the middle of a group without a trace or anyone seeing them leave the group. The strangest thing about these stories is the extremely localized nature of the current, as it is almost always only a single diver that is sucked down while the others are unaffected. If I were to take a guess, it seems like some sort of strange localized whirlpool phenomenon caused perhaps by 2 massive underwater currents colliding with one another. I've certainly seen stranger things at those depths. If you enjoy Murray's stories, old cranky biologist who claims the black carpet ate his ROV, then you'll enjoy this one. I didn't know this until hearing this story, but Murray was a military diver during the Vietnam War, in a harbor clearing unit. They did salvage, recovery, repair, rescue, clearing minefields, etc. I don't think any description of mine could do justice to what he saw, so I'll jump straight into his story. I was young back then. Not young, I suppose. I didn't feel too young, but sure was a hell of a lot younger than now. I got signed up into the Frogmen. And it was, well, I sure was thankful to not be out with the rest of them boys being shot to shit by Charlie. And well, I wasn't too afraid of it. The depths, dark, whatnot. We had those back then. It was the circular masks, regulators and real big clumsy tanks. And it was maybe more primitive than what we got today. But it was really, even the worst missions, it wasn't too bad. And maybe I felt some guilt about that, because all them other boys were getting shot up by Charlie and me. My job wasn't nearly so dangerous. So that was why I guess, when they said there was a need for a volunteer from and mind you I was in the Harbor Clearing Unit, Harbor 1. So when they said that there was need for a volunteer from Harbor 1 for some mission on the mainland, well I stood right up and said yes sir, that's me. They flew me out on a Huey with a bunch of air mobile boys straight away after that. I went to grab my gear but they said just get straight on the Huey and there'll be gear waiting. At the location, there'd be gear on location is what they said. I tried to chat up the air mobile boys on the way in, sort of suss out what the situation maybe was, but they were tight-lipped. In fact I couldn't get nothing out of no one about the mission till I was right there. Some high-ranking guy, colonel or something I reckon was there and he points me toward this hole in the ground. And it was one of them VC tunnels that you hear about sometimes from other GIs who were deployed out there. They'd run in their tunnel to hide, then pop out to shoot you in the back execution like, and sometimes there'd be almost a whole city down there. They'd have dozens of tunnels and passages and rooms. There was so many of them that we had to have a whole division that was called the Tunnel Rats. Them Tunnel Rats was engineers. You think that'd be a pretty sweet gig, pretty safe. But those tunnel boys, they gave 'em a knife, pistol, a flashlight and sent 'em down into these holes to clear out any VC that would be hiding down there. And they tried gas, they tried bombs, even flooding the tunnels, but Charlie was a clever devil and he'd build a dozen different ways in and out with some sort of water, like locks that'd keep the bomb from collapsing the whole thing or filling up with water. So eventually they would just send one boy in there with a gun to clear it, and I guess if he didn't come out then they send another one in there after him. Charlie would have all sorts of devilish traps in there, clever bastards they were, spears through the walls, bamboo spikes, all manner of venomous creatures hidden. And all of that made for a hideously dangerous job of climbing in those tunnels. So when this Colonel Major whoever says to me climb in this hole, I tell him with all due respect to go fuck himself. I'm a frogman not a tunnel rat, you sir can go fuck yourself is what I said. He says the tunnel got the all clear from the rats already, no traps or Charlie in there. And I was a bit suspicious about that, but they brought out the guy who cleared it and he told me that it was near as safe as a VC tunnel ever could be, though beyond a point they'd flooded it by accident or to cover their tracks. I don't think anybody was certain on that. So that was why they had needed me for the job. Colonel Major Sarge was of the mind that if the VC flooded themselves in or out, then there'd be valuable intel or something important hidden down at the bottom of that flooded tunnel. So they handed me a pistol, and a rope to drag my gear behind with on account of how narrow the tunnel was. At this point I was more than a bit uncertain about this operation, but what I figure is that if someone had to be doing it then. So there I was, crawling headfirst into some gook hellhole designed by the devil incarnate with nothing but flashlight, pistol and dive gear being dragged on rope behind me. It was a sure tight fit and I've never been too fond of those. And at one point it got steep, real steep, and if there was no way to turn around I was doubtful of being able to crawl up again backwards like. It felt quite a bit like, well, like I was going down into hell, with the tunnel narrowing and plunging at such a steep angle down, all the slick and mud with drops of it dripping down from the roof. It got so tight right near the end that I had a hard time breathing, from the tunnel walls scraping on both sides of me, chest and back. It was like being swallowed alive, which was, at this point I would have headed back straight up if I could, but it was just down, the only way I could head was down. So that's what I did, I just kept crawling as the tunnel much was beginning to close on me from all sides, but all I could do was pull myself further in, trying to shine my light up ahead in my mouth, hoping and praying to see a room or wider passage soon. Don't truly know how long I crawled for, cursing that Colonel Stars and Stripes for sending me down here, cursing myself for being stupid enough to actually crawl into a gook hellhole voluntarily. I was barely wriggling through the tunnel at this point, when I finally spot the reflection off water a further ways down into the tunnel. It's all so narrow now that I'm barely able to crawl or even breathe proper as I said, but I managed to reach it. So I take my light and the light shines down in there a bit, and I look to see what sort of room or passage I've found. But it was just more of the same blasted tunnel downward and now filled with muddy shit water that you'd barely see a couple feet through. So at this point I was wondering what the hell Uncle Sam had sent me down here for with diving gear if when I needed it, there was no goddamn room to even put it on, barely enough room even to breathe. I was there a moment or two, screaming every curse known to man, mostly out of fear of being trapped down in this hellish mud tunnel and with no way out except further down. That was about when I began to notice the water level was rising slowly, inch by inch toward my face. And like I said, my gear it's behind me, and there's no room to even reach my arms back, let alone put it on. For a moment I put up a tremendous struggle trying to push myself back, out of the tunnel, but I just ended up getting myself more trapped. Sometime during that, I must have dropped my flashlight because I can remember seeing it rolling down through the mud water and all light vanishing. Which left me stuck there in the total pitch dark, lost beyond all hope of returning to the surface. Only sound I could hear beyond my own screams and curses was the water drops coming from the mud roof of this accursed devil tunnel to hell, and the quiet water whisper as it rose up towards me. I think at that point, and God forgive me for it, but I was of the mind that a quick death being preferable to drowning. But I'd gotten the gun, it was in my waistband I think, and I couldn't quite get my hand back to grab it. So I couldn't even end my own misery, though at the point at which I resigned myself to death, it gave me a power of sorts. If I was all ready to die, already a dead man, then what danger was there in diving headfirst further into the tunnel's murky waters? I resolved myself that if I was to die in some watery gook tunnel to hell, with no chance of my body being recovered or seeing again light of day, there was no point in being coward-like about it. So I took a deep breath and plunged headfirst and crawling like someone possessed deeper into the depths of the tunnel. I don't recall much of the dive through that last portion of that was where the tunnel had been submerged, like I said. And I don't quite remember most of that, just that I feel the tunnel widen and then I'm pulling myself out into an empty, open space. I still can't see nothing at all, so I'm trying to figure top from bottom all the while my lungs feel about to burst. And I think that I saw a glint from my flashlight which logic would dictate is at the bottom of the chamber, so I swim the opposite direction of that. And that's well, I was swimming up, you see. Thinking maybe there'd be an air pocket up near the top, because I was at that point, hard pressed for a breath of air, any air at all. Weren't quite in my right mind either, or I probably would have just grabbed my mask and regulator off the rope trailing that was tied up behind me. But like I said, I was real desperate for a breath. Chest was burning, head was starting to feel weird. And I was swimming upward near as I could tell when my hand brushed up against something. Couldn't tell what in the blackness, but it was cold and felt like it was some sort of eel or other fish, but I just push it aside and keep going up, and all of a sudden I begin to feel it all around me, pressing up against me. The feeling was, well, it was slimy, slickish like as if it were a fish. But all real cold like and pressing up against me, and I was pushing them aside and trying to get further up before whatever they were could drag me down with them. Then I got a face full of what I thought must have been some seaweed of some sort. It was real fine for seaweed, but it was this wet, stringy stuff. And it was just getting into my hands, this wet slime of stringy sort seaweed. Some sort of worms I guess is what I thought it was. Yeah, I guess that's what I thought. I pushed through all of it and finally, thank God, my hand feels an air pocket. I don't think I've ever been so relieved as when I took that first breath. In fact, I was so much relieved that I hardly noticed the smell at first. It was putrid and hellish, about as evil and horrid as I'd imagine most journalists which are masquerading as humans must smell like beneath their suits of human skin that no doubt was flayed from some poor innocent soul without proper consent. But that's, well, I suppose that's a bit irrelevant. Anyhow, the stench, it was truly horrid. Smelled like death, the devil and all his demons were down here with me. But at the same time, I was real grateful to just be able to breathe regardless of quality of the air being shit. I stayed what must have been, a few minutes of breathing in that wretched stench before I heard it. There was sounds, it sounded like something else was breathing. Something who wasn't me. At first I was thinking it's an echo, but I hold my breath for a minute or so and I can hear it faintly above the water splashing. It was, I won't lie, it scared me pretty bad. Being down there in the pitch black, with those things swimming around below me, seaweed worms or whatever all against my body in the water. After a bit I built up enough courage to dive down and find my flashlight. Had to push my way past those things in the water again, which at that point I had begun to suspect their true nature. Found the flashlight easy enough, being that it was the only light in that hellish darkness. And I can tell you, I was just about as grateful to have that light as I had been to take that first breath of air again. I go back up, shining my flashlight up through the mud shit water, and I see what I'd suspected. Those eels and creatures weren't eels, they were legs and arms and pieces of rotted flesh. Entire roof of the chamber was covered with, well, dead women, VC women. They were all just bloated and floating face down, with black hair that was coming down through the water from the surface. The entire surface of the chamber was more or less a human carpet of death and decay. Bodies floating face down, Their hair was hanging down from over their faces. And I was there, and I'd seen it. And I had to I swam back up and pushed some of the bodies aside. It was difficult, and I wasn't too good just then, but I had gotten back up to the surface. I was just really in a bit of a state, of some sort. It set I was just I guess, not feeling that well. Because you know that there was the other. I said that she was breathing, right? Well, it was, I had the gun out. And I saw her. And I blasted her. I don't know. It was, I wasn't intending to, you see. I don't think I intended to. I don't think so. But I saw her, and she had eyes, wide open. Her eyes they didn't react to my light. She must not have been human. Because I blasted her. I saw her there, almost right next to me, and she had those eyes. So I blasted her, right there. And those eyes didn't seem them no more. She was gone with the rest of the dead. She had this long, wet black hair. Like the rest of them, I guess. And she was shivering. I think I was shivering too. But she was breathing, as well. The rest, they weren't. And she isn't now either. Because I started blasting. Well, after that, I took my mask and re-gear. I took all my gear on. I dove back under and now, all my gear is good. I'm good. God, my mask, my oxygen, it's all good and I'm good. So I dove back under now, and I search. I find another tunnel near the bottom that's leading further down. And near as I can tell, there's no other tunnels but the one I came from. I consider going back through there, but I chicken out on account of it being too narrow for my equipment to fit, and overall the narrow unpleasantness of the whole previous experience. So I take the other passage and I tell myself, gotta go down to get back up. This tunnel, it's a bit wider. And it goes down a ways, a real good ways. It ain't comfy and the water is murky as shit, but it's a sure sight better than the last tunnel. So I'm counting my blessings and swimming, and trying to not feel the tangle of her hair, but I'm still swimming down for a long time. Eventually, I notice the walls aren't mud no more, but made of some sort of stone, like a cave more than a tunnel. And there was all sorts of creatures, fish with no eyes, strange sorts of bugs and the sort. I'd guess those VC tunneled into some cave system. And after, who knows how long, I came out of the tunnel and into a chamber. This chamber, it was big. Real big, never even saw no roof or nothing with my flashlight. It was huge. I was pretty much astonished at the sight and quite amazed. It was a welcome thing to see after the narrow passages and all the dead. It was very calming to see, that is until I started to hear it. It was breathing like before. Just that it was bigger, I think bigger than I think it should have been. Louder, in any case. It was, I was hearing it again, the breathing. I wasn't alone in there, so I tried to be quiet, real quiet, because it wasn't safe, so I follow the current because the water has to go somewhere. I find another passage and I follow it a while, and the current gets quite strong, and it's basically just tumbling me around in this current. And I figure after all that it's goodbye, good night, had a good run, but I'm being thrown around in this current who knows how deep underwater, leading to God knows where in the earth. And I've seen daylight for the last time. Out of nowhere there's this absolutely blinding light and a thundering roar, and for a split second I must have thought I was dead, but then I'm falling and I hit the water and I'm free. I'm out in the daylight again, floating down a river. And that's the end of the story. Murray ended up floating down the river until it went under a bridge, where he climbed out and started walking until a military vehicle came down the road and found him. He had quite a bit of trouble telling me this story for reasons that I think are pretty obvious. I had to coax it out of him. Sorry for the length. I usually try to keep these stories short, but a condensed version just wouldn't have done this one justice. So this happened when I am working on a crew doing natural research. Biologists. I am here to make their insurance happy, because I am diving in these waters for many years. Stay near them if they dive, stop the bad things from happening. They are doing research with the, how do you call them? Humboldt squid. My abuelito teach me when I am very young about the Diablo Rojo, which you call Humboldt squid. He was a fisherman, my abuelito. Abuelito would always tell me to not be near the water at night, or I will fall in and eaten by Diablo Rojo. These Humboldt squid, they are as large as 2 meters, very dangerous. Biologists are working to discover the hunting pattern of the squid. They are using a new sonar to image the squid movements. The data is being inserted to a computer and translates to 3D images. Very nice equipment, very expensive. I think maybe I am here to protect equipment for insurance as much as people. The research was trying to discover why the squid are talking to one another on a hunt. The Diablo Rojo will hunt in a pack of many hundreds, and he swims upward towards the surface in the pack. The sonar was showing us spiraling movements upwards from the deep, searching for prey. Because they are a deep squid, the Humboldt must talk to each other from the glowing skin. They change the pattern and each pattern has a meaning, though the researchers do not know it. They are trying to discover what the patterns mean, so they watch the sonar and then I go down with them to record the squid pattern. There are many different patterns on the squid, some dark edges on the fin of red, some dark red around the eye, some dark red with pale white around the eye. I believe there are maybe 20 variations total in color. There are 2 dives where we examine the squid and against what my abuelito told me, the Diablo Rojo do not attack us. One does come to feel my arm, but he is not very rough and there is no bite. I think he is tasting me? They have the tongue in their arms. They have 8 arms and 2 tentacle. All squid are like this, 8 arms and 2 tentacle. The difference is that the arms have only suckers on the tip, but the tentacle has suckers on the whole of it. The tentacle suckers also have sharp claw in them, for grasping and cutting of their prey. On the 3rd night of sonar recordings, we have anomaly. The squid pack on sonar does not spiral, but rises up instead straight in a line. Biologists are getting very curious, they have never been seeing this behavior before. So we are diving down to see them, and discover what patterns they have changed because of this behavior. We reach the pack and see something very strange. There is a new pattern of the squid never seen before. The body is white, but below the eye there is a long red streak that runs down from the eye and all into the bottom of their 2 tentacles. And above the eye on the arrow body of the squid is a shape in red, 2 lines across diagonal in an X and another line connecting them at the top. Every squid is having this marking, and they are all stopped in water that is very shallow for this squid. The biologists are swimming and recording data, take picture. But I am not very happy about this. I am feeling something is wrong, so I tell to them that we are leaving. They refuse to come, so I must stay with them. I am still trying to convince them to leave, when I notice one of the squid has somewhat strangeness to him. He is the largest squid, maybe 8 feet long. But that is not what is wrong. He has 10 tentacle, not 8 arm and 2 tentacle. All along his limbs are sharp claw suckers, instead of just being at the tip. All squids have the 8 arms and 2 tentacle like I said, so this is not right. I tell to the researcher to come and look at him and I show him how he has 10 tentacle. The researcher is very amazed, which is when I notice he actually has 2 extra tentacle that are hidden together and made to look like a single tentacle. So this squid has 12 tentacle total, but squid are all have only 10 total limbs, with 8 arm and 2 tentacle. The researcher is going to take a closer look, but that is when everything goes very bad. The big squid is very fast and grabs the researcher, dragging her down before I can pull my knife. And the entire pack is going into a frenzy, flashing red and attacking us. Some are pulling at the breathing equipment and I help the 2 other researchers fighting them away. They are attacking the lights and us and gear very ferociously, but I am trying to fight them with my knife and stabbing at them. One is biting into the head of the guy, but I cut his arm off and he is gone. I am bit many times, and they are cutting me with their sharp arms and tentacle. The old man is bit by a Diablo on the neck, and he is squirting dark green blood from his neck. I pinch the vein shut and pull him up with me, while fighting off another Diablo. He is coming towards me with open arms and tentacles forward, so I stab right into the inside of him, but I can feel him grabbing the knife with his beak, and all his arms and tentacle are ripping at me. So I have to let go of the old man, and grab the body of the Diablo, pulling him into my knife. I shred through his guts, he is limp and falls away, so I can grab the old man to pinch his blood vessel again. Then we swim to the surface. Fortunately we are not needing a long stop for decompression because the dive was not very deep. I am very sad for the woman who was taken by the large squid. She is very nice and beautiful, but I am very happy to save the old man who recover after being taken in hospital by Coast Guard. I have to make a lie-up to the insurance because the biologist does not want to be refused from doing the research, and if the insurance might know the danger of the squid they will charge many more times the price. Now I am taking my abuelito's advice to avoid the Diablo Rojo, which I should have done many years ago. Never again do I swim at night. The next story is another one from Frank, who seems to have simultaneously the best and worst luck when it comes to sea life. I saw a great white shark come out of nowhere behind him once, only for it to simply bump him with its nose and move on without harming him or anyone else. The danger in this story though, comes from a very different sort of creature. If you've read of my other stories, you probably know that Frank is a tiny bit reckless. Likes to dive alone in remote locations, often at night. This time he was doing a cave dive, at night. By himself. Which is pretty much the diver's entire list of do not do this if you want to live. So it's no surprise that he got himself into a bit of a dangerous situation. He was a bit sparse on the details, but the trouble started sometime after he entered the cave. The initial passage was wide, but narrowed significantly before opening up into a number of larger passages. Frank had left the initial entry and was pulling himself through the narrowest part of the passage. That was when he felt something bump up against his leg. Immediately, he froze. Something or someone was directly behind him in the narrow passage. It was too narrow for him to look behind himself, let alone turn himself around. So he gritted his teeth and slowly inched himself backwards through the passage. After a few moments had passed without encountering anything, he began to think that it had been some curious fish or his imagination. For a second, he thought it might be Frederick playing a prank on him. That's when the creature slammed into the back of his knee at high speed. The force of the impact threw Frank forward, bouncing him between the narrow passage walls. His first instinct was to get out of the narrow part of the cave so that he could defend himself, but the blow had done significant damage and pain shot up his leg when he tried bending the knee that had been struck. Kicking with his uninjured leg and pulling against the walls of the passage with his hands, Frank desperately pushed on through the widening passage. Before he could reach an area wide enough to turn around, another blow from the creature struck the back of his other knee. Pain shot up his leg, and as he tried to keep going, something grabbed the back of his flipper and yanked back on it, sending another searing jolt of pain from the knee up his leg. On the verge of panic now, Frank desperately pulled himself forward through the passage, where it finally mercifully widened enough to turn. He whirled around to face his attacker, and found himself staring at the long, fleshy snout and beady eyes of an Amazonian river dolphin. The creature stared at him from a few feet beyond his reach in the narrow passage, partially obscured by the blood now beginning to cloud the water. Frank's first thought was, "You shouldn't be here." Which is true. As the name would seem to indicate, Amazonian river dolphins live in rivers, not caves. Not to mention that this was a saltwater cave accessed from the ocean, and this species of dolphin was freshwater. Frank was in the right part of the world to meet one of these dolphins, but the one in this cave was extremely out of place. Of course, whether something should or shouldn't be somewhere didn't change the fact that there was a very large, very intelligent animal that seemed to want him dead, blocking his exit from the cave. The dolphin stayed nearly perfectly still as Frank stared him down into a pair of dead, beady eyes. Slowly, Frank reached back to the leg holster for his knife only to find it empty. The dolphin didn't blink or move, but Frank said he saw an imperceptible change in the thing's eyes. It didn't vocalize or even move an inch, but Frank knew from what he saw in those eyes that it was trying to kill him. Not because it was going to eat him, not because he was in its territory or any other reason animals usually kill. It was going to kill him because it wanted to. Because it liked it. Frank has always said that he's never seen a true sea monster. That thing in the cave, though. He told me. That was a sea monster. The standoff lasted for a few more minutes before Frank decided it was in his best interest to move further down the cave. Slowly he backed himself down the widening passage, keeping his eyes locked with the killer that shadowed his movements from a distance. The entire time the thing never vocalized, never made a sound, which scared Frank almost as much as the attack itself. "Dolphins wear their emotions on their sleeve," he said to me. "They are very expressive creatures, and I've never seen one be this quiet. Before or since." Frank continued backing down the passage, glancing back over his shoulder to see how close he was to the main chamber. Without warning, the dolphin struck. But Frank had been expecting that. He whirled back around, hands out in front of his face. The creature hadn't had enough space to build up a lot of speed, and Frank was able to push the blow aimed at his mask to the side with his forearms before grabbing the thing's snout and slamming it into the cave well several times. It thrashed and spun, knocking Frank's grip loose. It backed up a few feet and kept its distance as Frank considered his options. He couldn't stay put forever, and the chance of help arriving was slim to none. If he tried to leave the cave, the dolphin would probably just push him back. There was no exit further down the cave as far as Frank knew. Several sections were unexplored, but he didn't want to bet his chances on finding an exit while being chased by a killer dolphin. That seemed like the only option though, so Frank began to back up further through the passage. His attacker followed him again, albeit at a further distance than before. Right as Frank reached the part where the passage opened up fully, he slowed to a stop with one hand resting on the cave wall. In a flash of movement, the dolphin streaked forward through the water toward Frank. He had only one chance to get this right. Now, that thing was smart. And he knew it. Frank said to me, sipping at his bourbon. But he didn't know that I knew it. And what else he didn't know, I was smarter. Frank had guessed that the dolphin's goal was to get past him the large section of the cave, where Frank would be unable to properly defend himself in the larger open space with his injured legs. And if he tried to get out the cave through the passage, it would either drag him back in or kill him in the open water outside. Frank had only one chance to get it right. As the dolphin burst past him, he slammed one hand into its stomach while grabbing the head and snout with the other. With its momentum briefly halted, he pulled it tightly into a bear hug. That's when he shoved the rock that he'd picked up from the cave floor earlier directly into the creature's blowhole. I could tell that it was shocked, sort of. It didn't know quite what had happened at first. Frank mused to himself, staring into his glass. And it couldn't hear me well, let alone understand me. But I said to myself, time's on my side now, you son of a bitch. He knew it too, and scurried off down the tunnel in a flash. I could see him trying to get that rock loose. There was a few bubbles I saw, but I'm fairly certain it was stuck in there real good. Frank chuckled, drinking the rest of his bourbon. And when I finally got out the cave up back to the surface slowly, mind you on account of being unable to use my legs, that's when I saw him again in the moonlight. He was gasping for air, all pathetic like. Couldn't get enough past that rock to breathe proper, and couldn't dislodge it neither. I looked him straight in the eye and then I swam away. I'd imagine he perished shortly after, the murderous son of a bitch. One last short one, then I'm taking a bit of a break. This one comes from a friend of a friend of a friend, so I really can't speak to its authenticity. The guy in question was doing saturation diving somewhere unspecified. Not sure on the details of exactly what he was doing, but at some point he was approached by a creature that was unlike anything he had ever seen or heard about. The thing's appearance was described as like a sort of semi-transparent membrane or blanket that was undulating and churning in strange motions, which it used to propel itself through the water. It swam around the man for a few minutes before vanishing into the darkness. It was around 4 feet in diameter and, as I said, shaped like a sort of floating translucent blanket. The description doesn't match anything I know of, so it's possibly a new species,